Thank you, all of you, for being here tonight to join us on another Wheatley lecture. So for those of you who may have heard of the Wheatley lectures, we are honoring the life and the legacy of a former bishop, Melvin Wheatley, and we're charged with this task of creating an event that will honor his ideals of social justice, pastoral care, ethics, and creating an event that might be relevant and timely for people in the church and for people at the academic institution and people in the larger community. So again, when we think of the task of the Wheatley lecture, to be timely and relevant, to honor the ideals of Bishop Wheatley, and to blend the needs of the church and the academic institution, our choice for this event seemed fairly straightforward, actually. Bishop Kristin Stoneking has a background in both traditional and non-traditional settings, including churches and campus ministries, nonprofit work, ecumenical work, multi-faith settings, violence, reconciliation, consulting, all experiences that have helped form her belief in the importance of church, understood broadly and in terms of function rather than form. Bishop Kristin Stoneking's experience shows that religion can make a positive difference, creating more just and peaceful society. The church can become a powerful place for all people to belong. And that's just a small taste of her biography. I haven't talked much about the history of Bishop Wheatley either. That information is available in a printed program on the table in the lobby if you want to know more. So again, we're grateful for your presence here with us this evening, Bishop, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Good evening. It is such a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you all tonight. I have been wanting to come to the campus of Rocky Mountain College since arriving here in the Mountain Sky Conference, our four-state region of Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, Utah, and a little sliver of Idaho. That's right, Salmon, Idaho. So here we are, and I'm so grateful to be here. I am a former college minister myself, and even before becoming bishop of this area, the Mountain Sky area, I was aware of the legacy of Bishop Melvin Wheatley, for whom this series is named. I hold deep respect for his legacy in these states, in United Methodism, and in the world. For almost all of my ministry, I've served in Northern California and learned of Bishop Wheatley through my activism as a queer clergy person in the United Methodist Church. Until just last year, you may know, because I think we have a largely Methodist crowd tonight, the United Methodist Church's Book of Rules contained discriminatory language against LGBTQ persons. This was the case since 1972. And I knew that Bishop Mel Wheatley, as he came into his episcopacy in this area, in 1981, appointed an openly gay man, Julian Rush, to be pastor of a church in Denver in defiance of the church rules. Wheatley's acts of courage and faithfulness were some of the acts that I was aware of by faithful and courageous people that fueled my own activism. And in the early days of my ministry, I was inspired to keep serving. There were moments when I wondered, this is not a church that wants me or welcomes me, but people like Bishop Wheatley were known to me and inspired me to keep going. In those years, since I began in 1995, that was the year I graduated from seminary, and by the way, Kim and I overlapped at seminary at Garrett Evangelical in Evanston, Illinois. Since those years, I assisted in co-organizing a mass coming out of United Methodist queer clergy in 2016, which we considered a watershed moment. which then led to coordinating and advocating as Bishop Karen Oliveto, my predecessor here in Mountain Sky, was elected as the first openly gay bishop in the denomination, and that was also in 2016. So I consider myself in the legacy of both Wheatley and Rush as one of the founding members of the United Methodist Queer Clergy Caucus. And last May, I was proud to be among those who finally cast a vote to change our discriminatory rules in the United Methodist Church. Yay! And so one day it will not be a big deal at all to be an openly gay bishop in the United Methodist Church. I'm the third, but I am the first to be elected in compliance with our rules. All of this was possible through many, many actions, prayers, setbacks, and successes of many courageous and faithful people. Bishop Mel Wheatley's witness was an intersectional one. He didn't just focus on LGBTQ rights, but also acted in protective and courageous ways during World War II on behalf of his Japanese neighbors who had moved. They had been moved into internment camps. And so he moved into their house, and organized others to move into other houses so that their possessions and their homes would be protected. He lived the words of Martin Luther King Jr. that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. He stood in solidarity with the most vulnerable among us, and I'm humbled to stand in his line of succession. The arc of Bishop Wheatley's ministry and activism is especially important to lift up today. Though at least he was alive to see the apology and reparation by this country to Japanese Americans in 1988, he was not alive to see the many changes for the LGBTQ community that came after his death, such as federal marriage equality and the changes in his own denomination. In all of the steps that we take on behalf of greater justice, freedom, equality, and peace for all, we have to remember that whether or not we see the ultimate hope of our actions, the steps we take have ultimate and honorable value on their own. The steps we take, whether or not we ever get to see the fruit, keep us from despair. The actions we engage inspire others, and each action is an exercise of our individual and collective moral muscle. One of my previous appointments was as executive director of the United States branch of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. The Fellowship of Reconciliation is the oldest and largest peace and justice organization and interfaith organization in the country, with other national branches all over the world. Fellowship of Reconciliation is known for standing on the edge, often alone, in support of those who need a strong moral voice for justice and peace. And there's a story of one of my predecessors at the Fellowship of Reconciliation, a man named A.J. Muste. You may know that name. He's been called the American Gandhi. And this story comes from the time of the Vietnam War. Night after night, Muste stood alone in front of the White House with a sign and a light. And a reporter asked him, "Mr. Muste, do you really think you're going to change the policies of this country by standing out here alone at night with a candle?" And Muste said, "Oh, I don't do this to change the country. I do this so the country won't change me." So thank you for coming tonight. Your willingness to gather, to listen, to speak, and to honor the legacy of Bishop Mel Wheatley is so important and is a foundation for hope in these times. I want to thank the Wheatley Committee of Chaplain Kim Wasty and United Methodist Montana East District Superintendent Karen McCrae and Reverend David Burt as the committee for their invitation to be this year's speaker, and President Bob Wilmoth, the students and the faculty for the warm reception today. Rocky Mountain College is an essential institution in today's world, championing educational excellence and communal experience, bringing people together through the cultivation of critical thinking, ethical decision-making, and the promotion of the whole person, body, mind, and spirit. This broad outlook and set of values supports students in being informed citizens not just of Montana, but also of this nation and world. In turn, you all make us all better. So thank you. I want to begin tonight's talk of the crisis of communities, building lives of purpose, transcendence, and connection with 3 scenes from a college town in the West. In the first scene, it's a warm, early spring night, not unlike tonight. A group of about 60 students gathers for a midweek meal in an old house converted into community space. Some of the students live there in a new multi-faith community that has been built with rooms for 42 students in 6 new townhouses across from the main campus. It's a few years after 9/11, and there's a program after the community meal. The program is a panel of Muslim students sharing about their experiences of being Muslim in a post-9/11 world. One young woman in hijab reports and recounts bullying and attacks in high school and says she is relieved to at least be on this college campus where people are, as she says, willing to tolerate her. In the question and answer period, another student, Christian, stands up and says, "Toleration is barely the minimum and not what we hope for. What we want is to stand in solidarity with you and to know you well enough to know how to do that well." The first young woman is visibly moved and chokes up. Another scene, wintertime. 2 Jewish students, both residents in this multi-faith community, are in a heated conflict. It's late, past midnight. Their relationship, once the joy of both of their lives, is coming to an end. One student decides it's time to go to bed. She goes into her house and goes to sleep. The other, also a member of this residential community, but living in the townhouse across the common courtyard, well, he's not ready to stop engaging. He rings the bell to the townhouse, and there's no response. So he enters through the window. Not a smart choice. The house residents call the police, and he is arrested. Now, the community has a stated commitment to peace, and the students are invited into a restorative justice process led by the Christian clergy person and a Jewish rabbi. The hope is to restore the community to harmony through real accountability, apology, and repair. And though the student who entered the house apologizes, the residents of that house do not accept his apology. 2 other members of the community, both Christian, can't understand why the apology is not accepted. They're frustrated with what they see as the path to reconciliation being blocked. They urge acceptance of the apology and forgiveness, and quote a Bible passage on the importance of forgiving. The students all agree to come together again for a second conversation. And in this subsequent conversation, the Jewish students share their theology of forgiveness. In their understanding, 3 things must happen for real forgiveness. 1, real remorse must be shown. 2, action must be taken to repair. And 3, ultimate forgiveness requires the victim's consent. The Christian students realize that their theology of forgiveness is somewhat different from their peers. They realize that they have a bias towards a quicker forgiveness, and the show of remorse is not as much a part of their equation. Their expectation of how reconciliation is achieved is different from their friends' theology and expectations. This realization leads to deeper understanding and humility as they sit with the complexity of these different truths. The final scene comes on another spring evening, but this time it's a hot one. It's at the very end of the semester, and students are ready to be done. Summer break beckons, and a group of Sikh students are making dinner for this whole student community. They're excited to be serving what they consider to be their specialty, homemade pizza. Another student, Christian, comes into the kitchen as they're cooking and becomes upset. She accuses them of not keeping to the rules of kosher and halal that the community has adopted. The students who are cooking share that they're following the Sikh rules, which are similar. It's true the cheese isn't kosher, they admit, but it has all the same standards for cleanliness as if it were kosher. They feel the standard has been met. How do they resolve this issue when dozens of hungry college students will be showing up within an hour? Well, by the way, I just want to say all of these students are real people. They gave their consent for these stories to be shared or were experienced in public spaces. And in fact, the last vignette, the one in the kitchen with the Sikh students and the pizza, is the subject of a case study published by the Pluralism Project at Harvard. That's one of the most requested case studies by college campuses across the country. These are 3 very different scenes. The first is a post 9/11 about how it felt right after that tragedy to be Muslim in America and what solidarity looks like from those who seek compassion and peace. The second relates to a relationship conflict that turned into a lesson about different theologies of forgiveness. And the third vignette is about hospitality, food, and faith. So, what similarities did you notice? 3 very different scenes, but what similarities? Anyone want to shout out a similarity?
Different understandings of a path forward.
Different understandings, right? How about some similarities?
I saw that as a similarity.
Okay. All right, I'll go with that. Okay. Anything else? Young people, right? Yep, all college students, right? Young in their lives, right? Learning and growing. Yeah, back there, Rebecca. Yep, everyone felt like they were coming from a morally okay, good place. Yeah, please. A desire to be heard. Yeah, that's right. That's good. All right. So also, those are really good responses. Also, we have students who are all from faith backgrounds. In these particular vignettes, they're all coming from a particular tradition that they hold dear. In all of the stories, there was some kind of conflict. And the conflict came as a result of engagement with difference. So this is where Karen was going. All right, I got you now. And at the root of the conflict was misunderstanding, stereotyping, or assuming something to be true for everyone just because it was true for one person. In each scene, a key factor is this engagement with difference. Engagement at this level is unfortunately becoming very rare in our society. Increasingly, we are in a polarized nation where our engagements, whether through what we seek out or what the algorithm gives us, our engagements with those who are different from us are becoming smaller, and we're engaging more with those who are similar. But the truth is that we do live in a world of difference and diversity. And to live lives of wholeness and have communities where all can thrive, we need to be able to engage across difference. Engaging across difference allows us to see and experience beauty and complexity. It allows us to truly stand in solidarity with all people. And it allows us to deepen and become more complex ourselves. The lack of engagement across difference creates a doubly negative impact in a divided society. Not only do we not course correct as we become more and more separated, but also our skills to course correct are diminishing rather than increasing. We don't learn how to speak in the language of the other. We don't learn the nuances of context and background. We don't understand what's really going on, and we don't know how to act in ways that are truly helpful to others in need. The engagement that we need and that was present in each of these scenes is an engagement of commitments, particularly through the lens of our belief systems and our spiritualities. This requires first that we have some commitments and that we know what those commitments are. Commitments of belief, theology, and practice. And it requires a commitment to understand the beliefs, theology, and practices of others. It requires curiosity, humility, and perseverance. Diana Eck, the celebrated scholar of world religions who teaches at Harvard and founded the Pluralism Project, and who happens to have grown up not far from here in Bozeman at First United Methodist Church, has defined pluralism as an ethic for living in a diverse society. It is not mere tolerance that doesn't require us to know anything, and not mere relativism either, but an engagement of commitments. In this engagement of commitments, we come together at a common table and learn more about who we are as we the people. So where can we do this kind of engagement? It feels like the stakes are so high these days, and sometimes this kind of engagement can feel even dangerous. Well, the scenes I opened with all come from a place called the Multi-Faith Living Community, which is connected to the University of California at Davis. Davis is a typical college town in Northern California, about a little over an hour from San Francisco and about 20 minutes from Sacramento. I had the privilege of serving there as a campus pastor and leading a diverse group of students and university staff and faculty and community folks to found this multi-faith living community. We built 6 townhouses around a common courtyard connected to the existing community house. The community opened in 2008 and is still going today. And while these stories are real, and they do come from a specific geographical location, where they took place isn't as significant as this model for engagement. The model could be replicated anywhere. In this model, students who desire to live in the multi-faith living community are asked to sign an agreement. And in the agreement, they commit to 4 things. First, sharing their faith and spirituality and practices with others, while also being open to learning about others' faith, spirituality, and practices. Second, being a part of the community and valuing the community by eating together once a week and making a meal for others at least once a quarter. Third, actively engaging where people are suffering. And fourth, honoring a simplicity of lifestyle that values people over things and considers the impacts of their lifestyle on the earth. This model doesn't require building a set of townhouses to be enacted. A group of students could rent a house together and make these same commitments. And though living together does help to create these moments of informal relationship building, the model can work for folks who don't live together. They just need to agree to meet regularly for depth sharing, mutual care, and accountability. In fact, it was a similar commitment to daily meeting with a group of friends seeking to grow in depth and faith and relationship that sparked my own tradition, United Methodist tradition 300 years ago in England. But really, that's another story. And really, this engagement of commitments doesn't even have to be a group of students. It could be any group of people who wish to engage across their differences and build lives of meaning and purpose. That being said, being connected to a college campus is a real plus. Campuses are places of intersection, growth, and openness to new ideas. Campuses are largely populated by young adults, and young adulthood is typically a time when values are being clarified, major life decisions are being contemplated, and capacities that undergird a life of purpose and wholeness are seeded and strengthened. This model for an engagement of commitments with its 4 agreements may sound relatively simple, and in some ways it is, or at least the model is anyway. But practicing this way of being and staying with it when differences or even ruptures emerge, especially when they are connected to deeply held convictions, well, that's the hard part. So let me share another couple of scenes. In this next scene, a student moves into the newly opened multi-faith living community. She had heard the sponsoring organization, Christian Campus Ministry, had long been a safe space for LGBTQ students. She begins to decorate her room and takes out her carefully packed pride flag and hangs it in her window, which faces the main street. Another new resident, whose room is next to hers, asks her to take it down. The second student is from a family of immigrants and explains that she doesn't want to draw attention to herself. All her life, she says, her family has been striving to fit in and not be seen in what she calls a negative light. She feels the presence of the flag makes her unsafe. There is hurt and anger on both sides, and other students are not sure how to help. Another scene. Muslim, Jewish, and Christian students, in the course of conversation about their families and faith communities back home, decide they want to organize a panel from their respective faith backgrounds about different histories and perspectives on Israel-Palestine. They begin to look for speakers and to share with others the idea for the panel. As they go deeper into the planning, they find they cannot agree on a title for the program. One of the students says that though his faith community considers this territory holy, they would never refer to it as the Holy Land, and objects to that phrase being in the title for the program. Another student says he doesn't feel like they can have the program without having the term Holy Land in the title. There's frustration and the lack of a clear way forward. In these scenes, what is being exhibited is a tension between safe space and brave space. Safe space is a place where persons, particularly persons of minority or marginalized identity, can be vulnerable, relax, and feel supported. In a safe space, there is trust that a culture already exists and that there are agreements that allow for the expression of experiences without fear of reprisal or judgment. A safe space is thought of as a respite and a refuge. Often, safe spaces are made safe or kept safe because someone in the space is holding a duty of care. In the case of the multi-faith living community, that person was the chaplain. We did also find that one of the keys to the model working was having not just the chaplain engaged in the community, but also several guides who were elders on the faculty or in town, who offered their expertise in small groups and one-on-one relationships and their wisdom when they were called upon. As an outlet and sometimes even ombudsmen of sorts, these persons supported a safe space. Now, as good as that may sound, that expectation of consistent and protected safe space has often been critiqued. Safe spaces are very difficult to continually maintain. They require a level of control and predictability that cannot be guaranteed. In the multi-faith living community, what had been counted on as a consistent safe space, which was maybe unrealistic in the first place, had shifted to include what is known as brave space. Brave space is a space where people of varied backgrounds and experiences, beliefs, and perspectives can come together to explore and learn with each other without censure. In a brave space, there is attention to both intent and impact, believing that everyone intends well, but that even with the best of intentions, sometimes harm occurs. In brave space, there is a commitment to attend to these impacts with attention, care, and a commitment to not just repair, but to learn, grow, and do better. The term brave space was popularized by social researcher Brené Brown, but she's clear she didn't originate the term. She quotes scholar, activist, and organizer Loretta Ross, who said, "We told people, particularly rape survivors, that we could create safe spaces, when in fact all we can do is create spaces to be brave together." To call people into a brave space was to summon everyone to try something together. To promise people a safe space was to make everyone a promise about everyone else. And that's impossible to keep. Brown's research shows that there are 4 dimensions that are employed in brave space. And these are 1, engaging difference with vulnerability, 2, living into our values, 3, braving trust, and 4, learning to rise after failure, setback, and disappointment. So we have safe spaces, which should not be oversold, and brave spaces that call us to lean into that place where we may disagree, or we may see the world differently, or just bring some other kind of deeply held difference into engagement. In today's very polarized world, though, brave spaces are feeling like they take more than just bravery, but a kind of superhuman courage, particularly for members of groups who are already in states of heightened, real vulnerability and even danger. And just because brave spaces stay accountable to impact, it isn't always clear how to repair or how to learn to rise after failure, setback, and disappointment. And so, a third space is needed. Enter transcendence space. So what I want to emphasize tonight and to leave you with is this concept of transcendent space. Transcendent spaces can mediate between safe spaces and brave spaces and get us beyond the stuck places or the limits of these spaces. Transcendent spaces transformed the tensions between safe spaces and brave spaces by moving us into the mystery that is beyond each of us, where our fundamental interconnectedness lies. What is transcendent space? When I shared the agreements that students make to live in the multi-faith living community, you'll recall that those commitments began with faith and spirituality. All students in the community commit to share their own faith and faith practices and to learn about the faith and faith practices of others. Some students don't come from a distinct faith tradition, but experience spirit in their own ways, and they're encouraged to share that with others as well. Beginning with the sharing of faith and spiritual practices as the first point in the agreement is intentional. All human beings have an innate need for transcendence. In fact, one of the theories about addiction is that in our search for transcendence, we partake of substances that approximate a kind of transcendence. Because this high fills that innate need for transcendence, we return to the substance again and again, and it fills that need. But bodies acclimate to substances, and the transcendent experience or high diminishes over time. This causes a person to use more of the substance to try to get back to that original fulfillment of that transcendent need. And that this cycle of diminishing effect, followed by greater use of the substance in search of transcendence, is what can create addictions. But transcendence can be experienced without substances through spiritual practice. And in fact, that's the original transcendence. In an environment of difference, sharing faith, ritual, and spiritual practice, and inviting others into one's own spiritual practice is an offering of something that can fulfill that innate need. Engagement with others in spiritual practices can create a pause, and in that pause, there is a tapping into an ineffable source of connection. In a transcendent space, we have access to the experience of awe. Professor of psychology, Dr. Keltner from the University of California at Berkeley, has spent his life researching the origins of compassion, awe, and love. Keltner defines awe as being in the presence of something vast that transcends our current understanding of the world. And if you think about those stories, they were stuck in their current understandings of the world and needed something to go beyond that, to get out of that. That's awe. That's transcendence. Awe transforms our bodies and our brains. And when we cultivate access to transcendence in our everyday lives, it leads us to appreciate what is most humane, it allows us to get out of ourselves, and integrates us into larger patterns of reality and community. Transcendence and the related sense of awe can come from participating in spiritual practices such as prayer, fasting, meditating, and chanting. It can come from attentiveness in nature. It can come through engaging in the rituals and rhythms of a tradition. And when we do these things collectively, especially when we engage with those with whom we are stuck, we enter transcendent space. Transcendent space can deepen our safe spaces, bring more compassion to our brave spaces, and move us beyond the limits of both kinds of spaces as well. In a world where even the potential of brave spaces is threatened, the connections and experiences of transcendent space enable our actual survival. As I close this evening, I wonder what Bishop Mel Wheatley would think about the world we live in today with its divisions and its recriminations. What I do know is that he also lived through a very difficult and painful time. He saw dear friends and neighbors who were Japanese interned during World War II and the rise of authoritarian, violent, death-dealing governments. He experienced a church so recalcitrant in its exclusions of LGBTQ persons that he was alone on the Council of Bishops in his resistance for many years. In facing all of this, he likely engaged his own commitments in brave spaces. As a Methodist bishop who committed to the wholeness and dignity of all persons. And humans being humans, likely he and those with whom he engaged found themselves in stuck places. In those stuck places, as a person of deep faith, I trust that he leaned into transcendent spaces to access the oneness that is our true nature. Whether he named it as such or not, my guess is that he was accessing and leading others into transcendent spaces. I hope you will consider adding the phrase transcendent spaces to your lexicon of engagement that includes safe spaces and brave spaces. May we all experience that sense of awe and have regular access to transcendence, which moves us beyond our intractable and separated places into deeper places of compassion, and freedom, and justice, and peace. Thank you.